Happy holidays. Welcome back. My name is Sheldon McLeod. This is Thinking Out Loud. It's presented to you here exclusively on the SaltWire network. You can also find us where you find your podcasts, and we have a new YouTube channel. I hope you can find that, search it out, subscribe and like the videos, and it's a great place for us to show you some of the wonderful work that my colleagues are doing here at SaltWire. Now, we're at that time of the year when a lot of the news cycle is going to be about a year in reflection as soon as we get a little bit closer to Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. And just looking back in 2022, February of 2022, there was a lot going on at the time. I don't know if you remember that occupation in our nation's capital. And a lot of the focus was against media. And this is something that's new, a relatively new phenomenon, at least in my experience as someone who's worked in media for close to 25 years. And someone else who works in media posted this on her Twitter account. This is in the midst of, whether or not Twitter was going to survive. Teresa Wright says, I put up with a lot of abuse on this app over the years. Since I don't expect to be on this app much longer, I've decided I won't tolerate any more abuse. If you insult or troll me or call me a shill, I block. Period. So what's going on? I don't have a perspective of being a woman in journalism in Canada, obviously. Teresa Wright is a global national health reporter. Did I get that right?
That's right, yeah.
And we're joining her now in Charlottetown. And happy holidays to you, Teresa. Thank you much for doing this.
Well, thank you very much. It's been... I think there has been a big change, at least in Canada, over the last, I would say, probably 2 years, in terms of how people, especially women in the media, are treated. Sorry, my light just turned off. Are treated on social media and increasingly in real life interactions as well. And I think that the convoy protest in Ottawa was a really stark example of how much has changed and how far we've come in that regard.
I wonder, though, is this specific to journalism, or is this just the way people are these days since the pandemic?
I think that people are more, at least on social media, they're definitely, it seems to be that people are more willing to be quick to anger, to be very vocal in their criticisms of whether it's public officials, whether it's journalists, whether it's, you see a lot of abuse being, put toward public health officials, scientists, infectious diseases experts, anybody who is out there kind of giving information that is considered to be controversial, especially in the, anything to do with the pandemic. It's a brave new world right now.
I live in a world where, some of what I do is considered opinion, but I provide an opportunity for people to give me their expertise. And when an expert tells me this is how they see things or how they feel about the way things are going, I, for the most part, will question that, but take it into consideration, take it under advisement. But there are some people who just think what we are doing is nothing more than propping up some sort of conspiracy, for a lack of a better term. And I don't know where that came from, and I really don't know how you counter that.
Well, it's hard, especially those of us who are in the journalism field, because, it's our jobs to be presenting, the opinions or the expertise of the people who know about what it really is going on. And it's not our job to decide whether what they're saying is true or not. It's really just to reflect on what they're saying and try to balance that with the best that we can figure out in terms of what people should know to go about their daily lives safely and to try to live through this pandemic. And so, I think it's really, it's tough when there are elements that exist that are becoming more vocal, that are very intent on spreading mis and disinformation. For sometimes, when it comes to misinformation, sometimes it's just people that don't really understand the difference, and that they really and truly believe that what they're being told is, or what they believe is true, even if it's not. And then in the case of disinformation, it is people who are actively trying to pollute the public discourse with things that are not true. So when there is such a proliferation of it that you see right now, and there are some mainstream political entities that are adopting some of this in their own language as well, it definitely plays a role in terms of why we're seeing so much of it in the public discourse right now.
And I'll admit that when I talk about the pandemic, that elicits a certain reaction from people who don't bother to listen to what I say or read what I'm telling them. It's just out of, it's just pushback. And that's all I see. And as you pointed out on your Twitter account on that feed was, you're not above criticism, but you said this is very specific and it's very gendered. Can you explain what you see, what you've experienced?
Well, like I said, and especially in the last year and a half, 2 years, it's really been, it's changed. I've been on social media for many years. I was an early adopter of Twitter. I was one of the first ones in our newsroom when I was working at The Guardian in Charlottetown to be using it, and always faced a certain amount of criticism, as you do, when you're kind of in a public-facing role, but the kind of messages, whether it's direct replies that are visible to anyone, whether it's direct messages, emails, it is very, very, it's nasty. It is, it's gendered. It's very misogynistic. I've received death threats. It's not okay. And I think more and more female journalists are getting this right now, especially if they are reporting on the health measures and and especially on some of those kind of entities that I mentioned on the far right that are very much against a lot of pandemic measures. They become targets, and it's just. I don't mind taking criticism. I don't mind for people to take issue with my journalism as long as that's what they're taking issue with. But when the comments are about me as a human and using language and words that I would never ever put up with in real life, why should I have to put up with that on social media? And I've always kind of shied away from blocking people on my social media because, what I write about mostly on my Twitter especially is news. And I don't want to be deciding, who gets to see the news and who doesn't. That shouldn't be me that decides that. But if what you're doing is just using my personal social media to attack me in such a nasty and horrible way, I don't feel anyone should have to put up with that. And so I'm not going to anymore.
What happens when someone threatens you? I mean, in social media, there are laws in Canada. How far do you take it? How far do you go? And how much of this, and please forgive me, it may sound coarse, but someone who says, well, that's part of the territory, just, suck it up, or, just ignore it. When you hear that, how does that sit with someone who has to actually deal with that kind of behavior or that feeling that you get when people say that nasty things should happen to you?
Well, I think it depends on what it is and where it's coming from. If it's just a couple of, messages or replies, most of the time I do just ignore it or I'll just block whoever is doing it. A lot of it is coming from anonymous accounts that were created in the last month. So, that it's bots or it's, not necessarily people who are really investing a lot of their time in these accounts. But when it's coming from, you can kind of recognize that it's the same person or people or accounts that are doing it more often. If you have an indication, as I have in some of my interactions where I might know the person who's behind the account and can potentially, take other action, I have reported things to, obviously to the social media platforms. Generally speaking, that's just not been effective. Even in death threats, I've received responses saying that it didn't violate community guidelines. I don't understand how that could be possible, and this predates the sale of Twitter to Elon Musk as well. So I don't want to say that this is necessarily a recent thing, but then also I've reported things to the police, and to be honest, they don't really do anything when it comes to social media threats. I've been told that is, unless there is a direct threat to my personal, like that's a credible threat to someone's physical self, they just don't treat it the same way. So it's very frustrating, and it's very, I think it really showcases a huge hole that we have in our laws, and not just in some cases the laws exist when it comes to cyberbullying. We have had a little bit of an evolution in that, but the way that those laws are applied by law enforcement and by Crown attorneys are something completely different as well. And in many cases, that's where things kind of stall, and it's I'm becoming increasingly frustrated and finding it, it's only a matter of time before something happens where someone, could be actually targeted by someone who has been making these complaints. And I really, really hope that doesn't happen, but it almost feels inevitable these days.
And I've seen other journalists across Canada, female journalists in particular, who have said, have had similar experiences and have had similar, perhaps, reaction from law enforcement about what it is that they will or won't do about that. Your post was on Twitter. It was suggesting you may be leaving the platform. You haven't to this point. So what is it about, and I don't want this to be about Twitter, but why is it important to still be on social media? Why do you feel that there's still a place for Teresa Wright on social media?
Well, I do know that there are people who follow me, who come to me and even in real life and say that they appreciate the work that I do, that they follow my work, and that's how they follow me. And it's also an avenue for people to be able to reach out for me. That's a double-edged sword in this world, where people can send me horrible things, or they can reach out and whether it's news tips or whether it's just asking questions about things that I'm covering. I think as a journalist, I want to be reachable. I want to be able to be there where my audience is, and for now it seems like it's still there. But I'm still on Twitter. But I'm not there in the way that I used to be. I used to be posting all the time. I was very much more conversational. I really only post about work now. I don't have anything. I rarely had very much personal, but I certainly don't anymore. It's what is happening has changed how I behave, how I use it, what I'm willing to share, and I think that. That's a natural evolution too, but at the same time, I think it's unfortunate that things have gotten to where they are. And people keep asking me, well, if you leave Twitter, where are you going to go? And I don't know, to be honest, because I don't really see that there's a natural sort of evolution there's a few other websites that people are going to, but it doesn't seem really organic in terms of that everyone is going to one place or another. So I sort of am kind of waiting to see what will happen next. But, we didn't have social media for a long time, before it existed. So if for some reason this all implodes, then I think we'll survive.
So more than 15 years as a journalist covering politics, covering the world around you. And here we have this change in the tone that people are distrustful of institutions, including the media and government these days. So any thoughts, any advice to young journalists who might be, looking towards a future that may or may not include social media? What do you tell people? How do you, explain what it is that you do and why you put up with that?
It's that's a really tough one. And, I was teaching students last year, and one of the classes I taught was a social media class for young journalists or for new journalists. And it was, and I've been wondering, if I had to teach that course this year, what would I do? I don't know. I think, honestly, journalism existed long before this, and it will continue to exist long after this. So I think it's just, keeping your work true and keeping true to what you believe in as a journalist. And that's what I've always done. That's what I'll continue to do. I'll still be as reachable as I can to people who really have honest, and good ways of wanting to reach out to me. And if that means that sometimes, there's things that come through that are not great, that's fine. Again, I'm not thinking, I don't want people to think I have like a thin skin for criticism or anything. It's not that. It's more that I have to think about my safety, my family's safety. and balance all of that. But I mean, I think it's not. It's really just it's a symptom of the world that we're in right now. We're in a changing time, and I think it's never been more important for people to have access to good quality journalism that they can trust. So from that perspective, I think that what I'm doing is more important than ever, and I'm just going to keep focusing on that.
I'm really grateful for the time that you gave, and that obviously we're at that time of the year where people will be looking back. So before we go here, and not to just talk about that one thing, but is the crisis in healthcare the healthcare story of the year?
I honestly, I don't see what else it could be. I mean, except for, COVID-19, but it's all kind of part of the same thing where, we started this year with, the wave of Omicron hitting, Canada and North America and the world. And it changed the way that the pandemic was, existed in the world and how we navigated around it. And now to see what's happening in our healthcare system with all of these other viruses that are happening at the same time that we have a shortage of nurses and doctors. We don't have enough family doctors across Canada. We don't have enough places, opportunities for people to age at home. And so they are ending up in hospitals. All of this is putting pressure on our emergency departments in a way that has never really been seen before, according to all of the frontline workers that I've been talking to for months and months. And I think, seeing what's happening there and now people are experiencing it when they go and their children are sick and they go and they see what's happening, and they may not have realized it before, but I think they are now. And so the pressure really is on governments and on health authorities to listen to the frontline workers, just to implement the things that they're asking for, which is really just beefing up primary care and making it easier for people to have that preventative health care so they don't end up in the emergency room. That I think is really the healthcare story of the year.
National health reporter for Global News, Teresa Wright in Charlottetown. I wish you a very happy holiday. I wish you all the best, and I'm glad to see you resilient to some of the pushback, some of the people and the critics, and keep up the great work. It's important stuff that you're doing. It's important, messages that you're bringing. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. Happy holidays.